Let's go look at a couple of tricks for your hand planning lesson now. The first is the all-in threat, also referred to as the hammer of future bets, also referred to as the concept of leverage. The idea here is if your opponent has, say, two bets left, and we're talking pot size bets here, so if the pot was like 10, he would have about 40 because the first bet would be 10 and the next would be 30, making 42 pot size bets. Then by betting the pot or something close to it, one of his bets, we force him to play for his stack without risking ours. We're only risking 10, but we're making him risk 40. We're making him risk everything. Because if he wants to play the pot, he's either got to go all himself or be prepared to call the bet that we're going to put out there on the river. At least as far as he's concerned, that bet's coming. I talk more about this in the barrel theory lesson, but the idea is he can't call your bet and just hope that you check down afterwards. He has to fear that that next bet is coming, and this makes for an extremely powerful bluff. But it's still a low risk bluff as long as the stack sizes are correct for it. Let's say our villain has 3 bets and we bet the flop. The idea is pretty similar. As long as he knows you're capable of continuing to bet, if he wants to call that first bet, he's got to be prepared to call off the rest of his stack because he's got to expect that second bet is coming on the turn and that third bet is coming on the river. So like now, let's say they had like a 30 BB stack, big blinds. You're betting $3, 3 big blinds, whatever on the flop, and you're like threatening out like 27 of his because he just has to fear those future bets are coming. Because, you know, that's what you do if you have a real hand too. You'd bet small, bet small, bet small. So it's pretty cool stuff, and it shows you don't need to just go all in to make a good bluff. Oh, and just as a note, this concept doesn't work on the river because our opponent can just call the bet that we make on the river and end the hand right there. So there's no threat of future bets coming. So next, we've got trapping for stacks. The idea here is either our opponent is playing a smaller than 100 BB stack, or we got like a lot of money in before the flop, so the pot is big and the stacks are small. So our like pot to stack ratio is low rather than high. Okay, so let's say the pot's 150 already because we somehow got 75 BBs in pre-flop, and we each have 100 big blinds left, and the flop is like ace king queen and you've got jack 10. I don't know how you put in 75 big bets with jack 10, but you did, and you flopped a straight. Now I'd usually advocate betting to build, but at this point there's no need to. If your opponent has a big hand like a set or ace king, sure, he'd call your all in if you put it out there, but he'd probably also bet all in himself and you could just call it with the nuts. If on the other hand he's got nothing, like maybe he got 4 bets in with like 9-9, if you bet, you allow him to fold because, you know, he can't call on that board with just 9s. Whereas if you check, you allow him to bet the hand for you, and you'll get value from a hand that you otherwise would have got nothing from. Now, obviously, if like the flop goes check check and the turn goes check check, you have to bet the river because you don't want to miss out on that value. But as long as you know you can get all in and you have some streets to spare, give your opponent a chance to just do the betting for you. Let him hang himself. So, you know, just to reiterate, the idea is if there's only 1 bet to go, but there's more than 1 street left, like you're on the turn and you just have a pot size bet left, or there's 2 bets to go, but there's 3 streets left, give your opponent that chance. You've got some free streets. You don't need to worry about building the pot because it's already big enough that you know you can get all in if your opponent's willing to play that all in pot with you. Take a gamble, let your opponent hang himself, because if he's got a hand that's good enough to call all in, he's going to play with you for sure by betting, you know, by calling your bet. But if he doesn't have a hand, you're only going to get his money if he decides to bluff at you. He's not going to call it off. You know, people love to bluff, but they can't bluff if you go all in before it's their chance to act. Simple as that. Finally, I've got don't get priced in here. With this one, I am really just trying to tell you guys to be cautious. Say you bet the flop with a flush draw, and the turn breaks out. Your opponent checks to you. Well, we know that if we bet, we open the door to getting raised, and this sucks for two reasons. Number one, they might raise us so big that we have to fold our hand and give up our 20% equity, which, is quite a lot to give up. We're winning that pot one time out of five. And number two, they might bet, just enough because they're a short stack and they go all in to give us odds to call. And yes, at this point in the hand, mathematically, it's correct to call the bet. But we've now paid the maximum to see our draw, our opponent's full stack, and when we could have just avoided it by checking back and taking our free card and making our flush one time out of five. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to double barrel. Sometimes you got to make that bet because our opponent loves to call the flop with ace high, but he will only call the turn with like top pair. So he's just going to fold out of a ton of his range. But if your hand has value and you wouldn't like getting raised, then don't bet. Draws are awesome for getting value when you hit them, but as good players, we want to pay the minimum to see our chance to make our draw. Don't make bets that force you to call off your stack without a made hand. Always look at stack sizes before the flop comes out. Plan your hand accordingly. If you have a hand you want to be all in with, make sure you do everything in your power to set up an all-in river bet. The idea here is that the stack size on the river are equal to or less than the pot size. So when you bet the river all in, your opponent's going to be getting pretty good odds to make the call. Of course, you'll probably have the nuts, but he'll be like, wow, like $100 to win 200. I only have to be right one time out of three. I got to call, Whereas if, you make like a $200 bet into a $100 pot on the river, now his odds aren't so good, and it also looks fishy. So try to set up that pot equal stack sizes on the river if you want to be getting all in. And then if you have a hand you want to play small ball with, control the pot. Just take some streets off. Just check it back. Trap your opponent. Don't get trapped. And use leverage of that all-in threat to put power behind your small stabbing bets. If all this is done properly, your opponents are going to have a very tough time against you, and that is exactly what we want.